A crumb of a day. Barnaby Crumb kicked at a stray pebble as he trudged up the driveway towards the Sunny Rest Hotel. Sunny Rest. More like soggy mess, he thought, the usual sour taste rising in his mouth. Another day, another parade of entitled tourists and penny-pinching locals, all expecting him to bend over backwards for the privilege of staying in this glorified roadside motel. He hated his job. Hated the fake smiles, the forced cheerfulness, the constant drone of inane requests. He pushed through the revolving doors, the mechanism groaning in protest, a sound Barnaby found oddly satisfying. At least something else was as miserable as he was. He lumbered towards the front desk, already steeling himself for the onslaught. "Morning, sunshine." Brenda chirped from behind the reception counter, her voice dripping with an enthusiasm that Barnaby found deeply offensive. He grunted in response, snatching the handover notes from her outstretched hand. "Anything exciting happened last night?" he asked, the sarcasm practically audible. Brenda's smile faltered slightly. "Just the usual. Mr. Henderson complained about the noise from the ice machine again. And Mrs. Gable needed extra towels. Oh, and someone tried to sneak a cat into their room." Barnaby rolled his eyes. "A cat? Of course." People had no respect for the rules. He took his place behind the desk, adjusting his tie with a frustrated tug. Brenda flitted away, leaving him alone with the oppressive silence of the lobby, a silence he knew wouldn't last. He was right. Barely 5 minutes had passed when a stout woman with a bouffant hairstyle the color of overripe peaches stormed towards the desk, her face a mask of indignation. "I was told I could have a late checkout," she bellowed, her voice echoing through the lobby. Barnaby sighed inwardly. "Here we go." "And what room were you in, madam?" he asked, his voice flat. "Room 207. And I was promised." "I spoke to a young man with glasses," she sputtered, her face turning an even brighter shade of peach. Barnaby consulted the computer screen. "Checkout was at 11, madam. It's now 11:30. There's a late checkout fee." "A fee? But I was promised. I need extra time to pack. I have delicate things." Delicate things, Barnaby thought, eyeing her up and down. Doubtful. "I'm afraid hotel policy is hotel policy, madam. There will be a fee." The woman huffed, her bosom heaving. "This is outrageous. I'm never staying here again." "That's entirely your prerogative, madam," Barnaby said, without a trace of sincerity. He processed the late checkout fee with a grim satisfaction, watching as she grudgingly swiped her credit card. As she finally stomped away, muttering under her breath about incompetent staff and broken promises, Barnaby leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a brief moment, willing himself to find some semblance of inner peace. He opened them again to find his next victim already approaching the desk. A skinny man with a wispy beard and a backpack that looked like it had seen better decades. Barnaby sighed, a sound that bordered on a theatrical groan. Another crumb of a day, beginning. The weary traveler. The lobby of the Golden Slumber Hotel smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale dreams. Arthur Penhaligon shuffled across the faded floral carpet, each step a testament to miles walked and battles fought, battles no one would ever know he'd waged. He clutched a small, worn canvas bag, its contents likely mirroring the meager possessions he held dear. Behind the front desk, Barnaby Crumb slumped like a discarded marionette. His tie was loosened, his eyes were bloodshot, and his general disposition suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He watched Arthur approach with the weary resignation of a man expecting nothing good. Arthur stopped a respectful distance from the counter. "Excuse me," he said, his voice raspy but gentle. "Do you have a room available for the night?" Barnaby didn't bother to look up properly. "Got 10 rooms. All overpriced. Take your pick." He gestured vaguely with a pen that had clearly seen better days. Arthur's clothes were unremarkable, patched and faded, but clean. A simple wool coat concealed the lines of his age, though it couldn't hide the stoop in his shoulders. His hands, gnarled and calloused, spoke of years spent working with the earth. But it was his eyes that held the most compelling story. They were a startling shade of blue, clear and kind, despite the network of wrinkles that framed them. They held a depth that suggested a lifetime of witnessing both great beauty and unspeakable horrors. "Just a single room would be fine," Arthur replied, his gaze steady. "Something quiet, if possible." Barnaby finally made eye contact, his expression sour. "Quiet costs extra. Everything costs extra. Welcome to the golden slumber." He pushed a registration form across the counter with unnecessary force. Arthur picked up the form with careful fingers. The pen felt awkward in his hand, more accustomed to a spade or a sword than bureaucratic niceties. He filled out the required information slowly, deliberately. His name, Arthur Penhaligon, seemed to hang in the air, unremarkable in its simplicity. Barnaby tapped his fingers impatiently. "Hurry it up, Grandpa. Some of us have actual work to do." Arthur didn't react, didn't even glance up. He simply finished the form and slid it back across the counter, along with a handful of crumpled bills. Barnaby counted the money with a practiced flick of his wrist. His lips curled into a sneer. "This barely covers a night in the broom closet. You got any more?" Arthur's gaze met Barnaby's again, the blue unwavering. "That's all I have," he said softly. "It's enough, isn't it?" Barnaby hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. He looked at the weathered face, the kind eyes, the humble demeanor. He saw not a threat, not a nuisance, but a man at the end of his rope. And for a fleeting moment, Barnaby almost felt pity. But pity was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not tonight. Not ever. Not even close, he snapped, grabbing the registration form and tossing it onto a pile of similar rejects. "Try the shelter down the street. They cater to your kind." A heartless refusal. Barnaby Crumb couldn't mask his disdain. The chime above the entrance heralded an arrival, and Barnaby, a dispirited heap behind the desk, straightened only enough to glower. The newcomer resembled a survivor of a cataclysmic encounter with thorns. His tweed, speckled with dirt, emitted a faint odor of rain-soaked earth and antiseptic. A dilapidated suitcase, more patched than proper leather, dogged his heels with each tired step. "Evening," the man croaked, his voice raspy yet gentle. A hopeful smile flashed a glimpse of a gold inlay. "Figured you might have a room. Just a single, mind." Barnaby's frown deepened into a rigid mask. His gaze swept the man's worn clothes and the deep lines fanning from his eyes, another down on his luck type sniffing around for charity. He was in no mood. "Afraid not," Barnaby snapped, the words sharp and unwelcoming. He made no pretense of checking availability, not even a glance at the monitor displaying vacant rooms. "We're packed solid." The man's tentative cheer withered. "Oh. That's a pity. Been hiking all day, hoping for a bit of rest." The suitcase groaned as he shifted its weight. Barnaby tapped a pen, the staccato rhythm a stark contrast to the man's quiet disappointment. "As I said, full up. Try the Golden Barrel down the road." He was well aware of the barrel's reputation for inflated prices and shady clientele. The man sighed, a weary exhalation that spoke volumes. "Right. Well, thanks all the same." He turned, his shoulders slumping further under the weight of unseen burdens. Barnaby watched him leave, a brief, indecipherable expression flitting across his face. Not precisely guilt, more like irritation at the disruption. He returned to his crossword, the abstruse clues offering solace from the prickling unease stirring within him. Complacency for smug satisfaction slid neatly into place, a self-satisfied smirk tugging at his lips. Perfect. He ignored the soft chime of the bell signaling the man's departure into the frigid night. He missed the subtle glint of a silver pin, nearly concealed on the tweed lapel amidst the worn fabric. Barnaby Crumb saw only what he chose to see, a bother, an inconvenience, someone unworthy of his attention. He was wrong. Profoundly wrong. A revelation that would dawn in just 7 minutes. Turning away. The words clanged like a slammed gate. Nothing available. Arthur's spine bowed a little further under the burden of years and hardship. He'd nursed a faint hope for a spark of compassion in the clerk's gaze, a softening of that implacable mouth. Instead, he met only Barnaby Crumb, a fortress of apathy, his indifference a carefully constructed bulwark. "I understand," Arthur mumbled, his voice like gravel. The understand, it was a hollow sound. He felt only the sting of casual cruelty, the ease with which he was being exiled. Miles had been devoured, his boots whispering complaints with each step, the evening's damp fingers probing his very core. He'd conjured visions of sanctuary, a snug space, a simple bed, even a meager crust of bread. He delved into his pocket, his fingers dancing over the meager contents. He presented them to Barnaby, a pitiful collection of coppers and nickels glinting dully in the lobby light. Perhaps a smaller room? Even just a pallet? Barnaby didn't deign to acknowledge the offering. "I already told you, nothing." A pen tapped against the counter, its staccato rhythm measuring the dwindling embers of Arthur's expectations. The air seemed to thicken, the ornate wallpaper looming like judgmental eyes. Arthur's gaze snagged on the roaring fireplace across the room, its palpable warmth a taunting contrast to his own chilling prospects. He pictured sinking into the embrace of a plush armchair, the fire's glow banishing the encroaching cold. But that solace was forbidden. He tightened his fist around the coins, his knuckles stark white. Disappointment settled, a leaden weight in his chest, echoing a lifetime of disappointments. He'd stared down far grimmer realities, mud-choked trenches, the bite of shrapnel, the tormented cries of comrades. Yet this rejection resonated differently. It felt like a negation of his very essence, a decree of worthlessness. Slowly, deliberately, Arthur pivoted. The movement was a symphony of aching joints and flagging resolve. He avoided Barnaby's gaze, the clerk's callousness belonged to him, not Arthur, yet the weight pressed down regardless. He shuffled toward the imposing oak doors, his boots scraping a mournful cadence against the polished marble. The chandelier, a constellation of dazzling light, seemed to mock his plight with its opulent display. Reaching the portal, he paused, his hand gripping the frigid metal handle. He risked a backward glance, a desperate, silent entreaty. Barnaby Crumb remained an unyielding effigy of indifference behind the gleaming desk. Arthur pushed open the door and plunged into the night. The wind howled like a banshee, its icy breath tearing at his threadbare coat. Rain lashed down, a frigid deluge mirroring the despair gathering within him. He hunched deeper into his collar, his head bowed against the onslaught. The radiant facade of the Grand Imperial Hotel receded into the gloom, a distant beacon of comfort forever beyond his grasp. Lily's stand. Lily was perched on the plush velvet settee in the lobby, ostensibly reading a tattered copy of Wuthering Heights, but her gaze kept drifting towards the front desk. Barnaby Crumb, with his perpetually greasy hair and disdainful sneer, was engaged in what could charitably be called a conversation with an elderly man. The man, Arthur Penhaligon, was thin, almost frail, with a network of wrinkles etched deep into his face like a roadmap of a long and arduous journey. His coat, though meticulously brushed, was threadbare, and his worn leather suitcase sat at his feet, a silent testament to his humble circumstances. Lily couldn't hear the words, but Barnaby's dismissive hand gestures and the increasingly slumped posture of Mr. Penhaligon painted a clear picture. Lily's stomach churned. She'd witnessed Barnaby's brand of casual cruelty before, his snide remarks aimed at guests he deemed beneath the grand majestic. But something about the weary dignity in Mr. Penhaligon's eyes ignited a spark of indignation within her. She slammed her book shut, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet lobby. Without a second thought, she marched towards the front desk, her footsteps firm on the polished marble floor. "Excuse me," she said, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised even her. Barnaby, startled, turned his head, his sneer momentarily faltering. "Can't you see I'm busy?" he muttered, his eyes narrowing. "Yes, I can." "I'm also witnessing your appalling behavior," Lily retorted, her gaze fixed on Barnaby. She then turned her attention to Arthur, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "Please disregard him, sir." Barnaby scoffed. "Mind your own business, Miss Bellwether. This doesn't concern you." It concerns me greatly, Lily countered, her voice rising slightly. I find it deeply offensive that you would treat a guest, or anyone for that matter, with such blatant disrespect. Is this how the Grand Majestic trains its employees? Arthur Penhaligon shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between Lily and Barnaby. Please, miss, it's all right. I understand. I'll try somewhere else. He reached for his suitcase, his movement slow and deliberate. Nonsense, Lily said, her hand instinctively reaching out to stop him. You deserve to be treated with courtesy and respect, just like everyone else. Barnaby, she turned back to the clerk, her eyes blazing, either find Mr. Penhaligon a room, or I will personally report your conduct to Mr. Hawthorne. Barnaby's face flushed a mottled red. He knew Mr. Hawthorne, the hotel manager, wouldn't tolerate such complaints, especially from a guest as influential as the Bellwether family. He opened his mouth to protest, but the determined glint in Lily's eyes stopped him. He swallowed hard, his usual arrogance momentarily subdued. Fine, he muttered, grabbing a room key from the rack behind him. Room 307. Top floor. Enjoy your stay. He practically threw the key onto the counter, avoiding eye contact. Lily picked up the key and handed it to Arthur, her smile genuine this time. I hope you have a pleasant night, sir. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to make your stay more comfortable. Overheard. Barnaby Crumb steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on some distant point above Arthur's head, a technique he'd perfected for dismissing unwelcome guests. I've explained myself rather thoroughly, Mr. Penhaligon. We're fully booked. Perhaps you should try the Seaview Inn. I hear their clientele is more accommodating. Lily Bellwether bristled. That's enough. He has a reservation. I saw it. You're being deliberately difficult. Barnaby's gaze snapped down, landing on Lily like a fly caught in amber. And what business is it of yours, miss? Bellwether, is it? I suggest you mind your own affairs. His voice dripped with condescension, a thin veneer of politeness barely concealing the snide undertones. Lily stood her ground, her chin lifted defiantly. The floral pattern of her dress seemed to vibrate with her indignation. It's my business when I see someone being treated unfairly. This man is tired, he's traveled a long way, and he has a valid reservation. You should be ashamed of yourself. Barnaby's face flushed an unbecoming shade of puce. He opened his mouth to retort, but the tinkling sound of a small bell cut him off. Mrs. Gable, a woman whose bouffant hairstyle defied gravity and whose floral caftan could rival a tropical rainforest, bustled into the lobby. She was clutching a damp towel, her brow furrowed in a permanent expression of mild exasperation. Honestly, she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, one would think a 4-star hotel could manage to provide sufficient towels. I requested extras hours ago. She paused, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the tense atmosphere. Arthur stood slumped slightly, his shoulders bowed with weariness. Lily was practically vibrating with anger, and Barnaby looked like a cornered rat. Mrs. Gable's gaze sharpened. She abandoned her quest for supplementary towels and marched towards the front desk, her sensible shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. What seems to be the commotion here? She demanded, her voice carrying a surprising amount of authority. She planted herself directly in front of Barnaby, effectively blocking his escape. I could hear raised voices all the way up on the 3rd floor. And frankly, it's rather disturbing when one is trying to enjoy a relaxing vacation. Barnaby swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He attempted a charming smile, but it came out looking more like a grimace. Mrs. Gable, there's really no need to concern yourself. It's just a slight misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that requires raised voices and obvious distress. Mrs. Gable's eyebrows climbed higher, disappearing somewhere beneath her towering hairdo. I rather think I deserve an explanation. Especially considering the exorbitant rates this hotel charges. She fixed Barnaby with a steely gaze. Well? I'm waiting. A hero's recognition. His lying, Mrs. Gable, Lily stated, her voice ringing sharper than she intended. Arthur winced beside her, placing a calming hand on her arm. Mrs. Gable, perpetually harried and surrounded by a chaotic aura of missing linens, blinked at Lily. "Lying? About what, dear?" "I'm already missing 6 bath towels and Barnaby insists he counted them himself this morning." Barnaby spluttered. "I did count them, Mrs. Gable. This gentleman simply doesn't have a reservation." He puffed out his chest, subtly positioning himself between Arthur and the reservation book, as if guarding a hoard of gold. Lily ignored him. "He does have a reservation. I saw it myself. Barnaby just doesn't want to give it to him." She pointed a trembling finger at Barnaby. Because of how he looks." Mrs. Gable's eyebrows shot up. "Barnaby? Is this true?" The woman's voice, usually strained with the minor crises of running the Seaview Hotel, now held a steely edge. Barnaby's face, already flushed, turned a shade of purple usually reserved for overripe plums. That's preposterous, Mrs. Gable. I would never." His voice trailed off, his eyes darting nervously. Arthur sighed, rubbing a hand over his weary face. "It's all right, Lily. Perhaps I misremembered the date. I can always find another place." "No." Lily's voice was firm. She met Arthur's gaze, her own filled with determination. "This isn't right." Turning back to Mrs. Gable, she said, "Ask him to show you the ledger. Ask him to show you the booking for Arthur Penhaligon, arriving today. He'll try to skip over it, I know he will." Mrs. Gable narrowed her eyes at Barnaby. "The ledger, Barnaby. Now." Her hand, usually fluttering like a trapped bird, landed squarely on the counter with a resounding thump. Defeated, Barnaby shuffled towards the heavy, leather-bound book. His fingers fumbled with the clasp, and he avoided eye contact with everyone. He flipped through the pages, muttering under his breath, his movement slow and deliberate. As Barnaby pretended to search, Lily's gaze drifted across the lobby. It landed on a wall she hadn't noticed before, a gallery of framed photographs. Local heroes, the brass plaque beneath proclaimed. Fishermen who had braved treacherous storms, volunteers who had tirelessly worked to restore the coastline, and then. Her breath caught in her throat. Third row, second from the left. A younger Arthur Penhaligon, resplendent in his naval uniform, a medal glinting on his chest. His eyes, even in the photograph, held that same quiet strength, that same weary wisdom. "Mrs. Gable!" Lily exclaimed, her voice filled with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. "Look!" She pointed towards the wall, her hand shaking slightly. Barnaby froze, halfway through faking a page turn. Mrs. Gable followed Lily's gaze, her eyes widening as she recognized the face in the photograph. The silence in the lobby thickened, punctuated only by the distant cry of seagulls. Arthur, his face etched with a mixture of confusion and embarrassment, looked up as well. "Arthur Penhaligon." Mrs. Gable breathed, her voice laced with awe. She turned to Barnaby, her expression thunderous. "Explain yourself. Now." An apology and a sweet. "Mr. Penhaligon." Mrs. Gable's voice, previously sharp enough to shatter glass, softened considerably. Her eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, widened as she scanned the confirmation slip again, then flicked upwards to Arthur's face. A slow dawning recognition spread across her features. The harried, almost frantic energy that had crackled around her a moment ago seemed to dissipate, replaced by a carefully modulated composure. Arthur, weary from travel and the unprovoked rudeness of the young clerk, simply nodded. "Yes, that's right." Mrs. Gable's gaze dropped again, this time lingering on the tarnished silver pin affixed to Arthur's lapel, a miniature replica of a Spitfire. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the muffled clatter of silverware from the dining room. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with an almost painful sincerity. "Mr. Penhaligon," she began, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this entire misunderstanding." "Barnaby," she snapped, turning a withering glare on the hapless clerk who was attempting to blend into the paisley wallpaper. "Explain yourself." Barnaby, his face now a shade of crimson that rivaled the lobby's velvet curtains, stammered, The system, said no vacancies." "I didn't." He trailed off, the words dissolving into a mumbled apology. Mrs. Gable cut him off with a wave of her hand. "That is quite enough, Barnaby. The system, as you call it, clearly indicates that Suite 7 was reserved for Mr. Penhaligon months ago. And," she added, her voice hardening again, "it seems to have conveniently overlooked the fact that Mr. Penhaligon is a decorated war veteran. A hero." Arthur shifted uncomfortably, the weight of past accolades settling heavily on his shoulders. He hadn't sought recognition, only a quiet room for the night. "Mrs. Gable," he started, but she raised a hand, silencing him. "Please, Mr. Penhaligon, allow me to rectify this egregious error. Suite 7, the finest we have, is yours, with our deepest apologies. Complimentary, of course. And," she added, her eyes twinkling slightly, "I insist you allow us to cover all your meals during your stay. Consider it a small token of our gratitude." Barnaby, looking utterly defeated, finally managed a barely audible, "Sorry, sir." The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He avoided Arthur's gaze, focusing instead on a loose thread dangling from his waistcoat. Mrs. Gable's sharp intake of breath filled the silence. "Barnaby, you will personally see to it that Mr. Penhaligon's luggage is taken to his suite. And then, I suggest you familiarize yourself with our guest registry protocol. Thoroughly." Her voice dripped with icy reprimand. As Barnaby scurried to retrieve Arthur's bag, Mrs. Gable turned back, her smile now genuine and warm. "Please, Mr. Penhaligon, allow me to personally escort you to your suite. I assure you, after this unfortunate start, your stay will be nothing short of perfect." "Lessons learned." "Mrs. Gable," Arthur said, his voice raspy but firm. He turned his gaze from Barnaby to the kind woman who'd appeared like a beacon in the storm. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing reason, and for your hospitality." He managed a weak smile. "It's been a long journey." Mrs. Gable's face crumpled with relief. "Oh, Mr. Penhaligon, you have no idea how sorry I am. We pride ourselves on taking care of our guests. Please, let me personally escort you to your suite. The presidential suite, of course. And dinner is on the house." Arthur inclined his head. "That's very generous, Mrs. Gable. I appreciate it." He paused, then turned back to Barnaby, who stood frozen, his face alternating between pale and red. Arthur's eyes, though tired, held a certain warmth. "Barnaby, isn't it? I understand you were just doing your job. But a little kindness goes a long way, young man. Remember that." Barnaby's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "Sir, I truly am sorry. I jumped to conclusions. I shouldn't have. He stammered, unable to meet Arthur's gaze. Arthur sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "We all make mistakes, son. The important thing is to learn from them. I forgive you. But promise me you'll treat everyone with respect, regardless of their appearance or their age." Barnaby finally looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of shame and gratitude. "I promise, sir. I really do. I'll be better." He swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir. For not pressing charges or anything." Arthur chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Pressing charges? Goodness, no. I'm just an old man who needed a place to rest his weary bones. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mrs. Gable is waiting." He turned and followed Mrs. Gable towards the elevators, leaving Barnaby standing alone behind the reception desk, a picture of remorse. As they walked, Mrs. Gable kept apologizing profusely, but Arthur waved it off. "It's all right, Mrs. Gable. Truly. You've more than made up for it." The presidential suite was opulent, with plush carpets, a roaring fireplace, and a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Arthur sank into a velvet armchair, feeling the tension slowly drain from his body. Mrs. Gable offered him a glass of champagne, which he gratefully accepted. "Is there anything else I can do for you, Mr. Penhaligon?" she asked, hovering anxiously. Arthur smiled. "Just a good night's sleep, Mrs. Gable. And perhaps a quiet breakfast in the morning. That will be more than enough." As Mrs. Gable left, Arthur raised his glass in a silent toast. Not to the luxury, not to the champagne, but to the lesson learned. To the reminder that even in the face of rudeness and prejudice, kindness could still prevail. He took a sip, the bubbles tickling his nose, and closed his eyes, finally allowing himself to relax. The city lights twinkled outside his window, a silent symphony of forgiveness and second chances. He drifted off to sleep, the warmth of the fire and the promise of a new day enveloping him in a peaceful embrace. The nightmare of the lobby was fading, replaced by the quiet comfort of redemption, not only for himself, but perhaps, just perhaps, for Barnaby Crumb as well.